seen that
and we've seen it
through Epstein's work. I mean, the blackmailing of politicians has now come out. And there's another thing that sort of ties Epstein and Kushner together, and that's Saudi Arabia. Both of those guys have very strong connections, not only to Israel, but to Mohammed bin Salman in particular, but to the royal family in Saudi Arabia as well. And, we haven't been following the timeline here, but if we went back to that timeline, what Donald Trump and Jared Kushner did in that first year, they basically spent their time getting MBS on board for their peace solution, their plan for Israel, how they were going to solve this centuries-old problem of Arabs and Jews not living in peace with each other. And so the way they were going to do that is get MBS on board. And that involved achieving some of MBS's goals. And MBS was not particularly happy with the fact that Obama was reticent to selling more arms. He didn't like the fact that Obama didn't stop the lawsuit against Saudi Arabia by 9/11 victims. That may cost them $1 trillion. And so he was incentivized to change the course of American presidency as well, because why not introduce a president that would be a little bit more. By the time we got to the first visit in May of Donald Trump, his first foreign visit, it started in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, if you remember that. There's this really strange event where they had their hands on this orb, this lit up orb, which I guess represents the world, which people thought was a bit weird. I'll show it to you in a bit. But
with Egypt, right?
Yeah, Egypt. The Egyptian president was there.
And that was a fun moment.
Yeah.
And know what side of the globe that they are fondling. It is the United States and North America that's a very special shot that in terms of propaganda. It is not they are not fondling Eurasia. They are these guys are all got their hands all over the Western Hemisphere with enough you can see. If you pull up the image, you'll be able to see, I believe, the continent of North America. There we go. What are they? I mean, that's kind of a ganky looking, Alaska, as near as I can tell. But you got Australia down in the lower corner there. So that is part of this. We were talking about it in our last episode, Zev. There's going to be two systems that are at war here: the Eurasian center of economic and strategic power, and there is the US, UK, NATO-led one. And this is a coup of the Eurasian model against the United States and NATO. And here you have their puppet, Donald Trump, who's in there, who's fully owned by multiple folks. You got the Saudis, and here we have Al-Sisi. That's Al-Sisi, right?
Yeah, that is.
Let's go back to the last episode. What was Mueller looking at for George Papadopoulos? Is he an agent of Israel? Mm-hmm. And when they were interviewing Simona Mangiante, his Ukrainian-Russian fake Italian spy wife, about what she knew he was. I'm sorry, my family's from that part of Italy, and that's her pictures of pasta. I just can't get over. But she said, what is George doing over in Europe? Well, he's looking to get a meeting between Trump and Putin, like he's already done for Egypt and Al-Sisi. And so here, the first trip out of the United States, does Donald Trump go to the UK to shore up the special relationship, or Canada? Nope, he flies out to the Bonesaw Mafia, and they all fondle a globe with their hands all over America. And
it's a really good point. I don't notice that before. I've seen this picture a million times, and I not noticed that, in fact, it was the United States was pointing out towards the cameras, and that would have been a very thought-about, staged thing. That was not an accident. Fondled that. There's a long history here of MBS's of the family, the royal family in Saudi Arabia, being involved in all sorts of organized criminal activity around the world. This wouldn't be that unusual for them, would it, LB?
No. There almost needs to be just a show, and I think it's actually so rich in content and touches so many massive historical scandals, things that seem like they just involve one or two people, to things that involve a mass array of nation states that you can't believe are even talking to each other, much less trying to pull some kind of weird thing off like what Iran-Contra was, without a Saudi arms deal. I mean, there's plenty of oil, as we know. It's almost like oil's the great diversion for that country, because it's one of its wealthiest people that ever walked the face of the earth in his day, was the wealthiest man of his time, was Jeff Bezos of his time, was Adnan Khashoggi, and his business was arms dealing. And his partners were Lansky and Howard Hughes, and they were using casinos to launder this man's money.
And Jeffrey Epstein later on.
And Jeffrey Epstein later on. This was the whale of all whales. Adnan Khashoggi was the whale of all whales.
Yeah.
And
richest guy in the world at one point, I think. And
richest guy in the world. He was a specialist, thanks to his mobster friends, of wiring up hotels and wiring up his yachts and wiring up his planes and putting people on it and making them promises. And here's a beautiful woman coming in, and oh my God, now there's tapes.
And the yacht that he sold to Donald Trump as well.
And the yacht that he sold to Donald Trump, wired to the gills. So this is the world that, of mobsters and spies, right?
Yeah.
Same tech, same methods, and a dirty Saudi arms deal apparently in the middle of everything every time you turn around.
Because there's a royal family here. I mean, this is not, you don't think of organized crime as coming from a royal family, but the indications
who else operates like a family? Who else uses family as their main operating structure?
What is that? What is that?
Yeah, it certainly rings true.
This is how we know we're family, right? Wasn't that what Paul Ryan said?
Mm-hmm.
So the deal gets done. Kushner pushes this deal through before Trump goes off, and it's $110 billion. Later on, we find out, of course, Congress doesn't even get to approve of this deal. Normally, the way it works is a deal gets done, and then Congress can say, has 30 days to say, we like it or we don't like it, and it should go away if they don't like it. They knew that Congress was not going to let this go through. So they basically, in the middle of the night, snuck in an emergency declaration to allow this deal to go through and sent $110 billion to the Saudis. In the background as well, they're also selling nuclear reactors to the Saudis as a part of a deal that Flynn was putting together, which has never really been accepted by anybody as a legitimate exercise. But here they were sending American nuclear technology to the Saudis to further amplify tensions in the Middle East. I mean, we're talking about a very dangerous game that they're playing.
This was nuts. I mean, if you remember, Flynn was at the inauguration that was partially financed by Russian oligarchs. But remember, this is all a hoax. There's no evidence or anything. There's just Russians at the inauguration who are part of this deal, who have put up the cash for Trump's inauguration. And you've got Flynn in the audience immediately texting his pals about transferring U.S. nuclear technology to the Middle East, which he was doing prior to having a position in government. I mean, the whole thing is still crazy, but this kind of goes, when you put up that timeline and you see how much was done. I think it goes back again to, this was an accident. They were maybe thinking of doing this level of let's call it integration of the United States economy through its own oligarchs with the different circles of China, Russia, the Gulf states. That was maybe supposed to happen in 2020, 2024, but they were deploying all these new technologies. These people in these different spheres with their hostile intelligence services, they may be partnered, but they don't work, they don't like each other, and they're very different. They have different ends. They just find themselves strategically, as they have been for decades or centuries. Well, we seem to find ourselves here, so let's work together until it doesn't work anymore. Mob families work that way, empires work that way. It's not that unnormal, except these guys are rolling out technologies, a lot of it stolen from the United States through various actors, and redeployed against the United States, which some of the people who created that technology could then identify it being redeployed on us, causing quite a lot of tension. They roll this all out in 2016, and wouldn't you know it, the TV guy that they put on NBC for 10 years and made him look like something other than a schmuck who's only good at bankruptcy. That everybody votes for him and he's in, and then they just rush as fast as they can to try and do as much as they can. Going back to Kushner's permanent security clearance, and what they did, if a lot of people forget, one of the first things they tried to do in the first month or so was take the intelligence community and the Joint Chiefs of Staff off the National Security Council and put on Jared Kushner and Steve Bannon. So Idiot McSon-in-law and Whiskey Steve were going to replace 17 intelligence agencies and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It didn't work. They tried to do that through executive order, and it lasted all of... It did not last very long. And the fact that it didn't... I mean, this was part of the fire hose of nonsense strategy of Steve Bannon and Vladislav Surkov and other propagandists, that you just fill the air with just manure, and it's just hard to figure out what's going on. But that was one of their first things, was to try and get rid of the intelligence community from the White House National Security Council. It did not work, then they just tried to do all their deals, and then they realized, oh, wait a minute, Comey's onto us. Wait, fire him. And we have the belief that, or there's reports that Kushner was the one telling Trump, you got to fire him, which of course is an incredibly stupid idea, because you do not fire the FBI director.
Unless the FBI director's got everything on you, and you don't, they just need to buy time.
But it brought in a special counsel investigation. Yeah. So,
but wasn't there already intense?
Then there was, we got to get rid of that now. So, it just.
I mean, that must have come from above. It wasn't just Jared's thinking. It must have come from somebody.
Yeah, Jared's advising in terms of just following the reporting on it. Oh, that was Jared's idea. Oh, writing COVID out, Jared's idea. All of the ideas that Jared are getting attributed to him, and it doesn't seem to be after the fact. It's not quite when they know how bad that advice was. He gets the attribution of it. All end up really hurting Donald's presidency. They really do. It creates more problems, more complications. It's this kid doesn't know what he's doing. Who knows who he's doing it for? He's got that. He's got that weirdness to him, right? And yet, Donald won't get rid of him. This is not a typical son-in-law. This is not
White House advisor.
This is not a typical White House advisor. Mm-hmm. He does everything Jared tells him to do, and he won't get rid of him. He's afraid of him. And anything that Jared wants to do, anything Jared wants to be in control of, right? He gets his stupid little folder that he takes his crayon marker and titles it and puts it in his drawer. And now he's in charge of FIFA, right? So,
is he? Did I miss something?
No, I think that's one of his things. He's got all these things. Meanwhile,
there's a JPEG of his file folder on his desk that has like the
from an
first
interview,
tiny folder. It's like encryption.
It's like,
second is like world commerce. Third is like the economy, long division. Carbon. I mean, and they're all tiny little folders, but the first one is encryption. And if you go to his interview with Adam Schiff very patiently, so do you use any encrypted apps, Jared? It's like, yes, I use WhatsApp for family pictures.
Right. Meanwhile, he's texting MBS about Jamal Khashoggi's death. I mean, it's just something else. When the end of this trip that Trump goes on, his big first foreign visit also includes the Vatican and Sicily, which, I mean, now that we know what we know about the kingdom and about Israel's, at least the origins of the Russian mob in the United States, and you add the Vatican and you add Sicily, and, there's a whole Opus Dei sidebar for Vatican. Boy, that's an interesting first trip that he took, the 4 countries he decided to visit.
Yeah, it was a mobster touring the world.
Yeah.
It was, I mean, it was, I can't even remember. I had a nickname for it.
That's Mobster Study Abroad.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was Mobster Study Abroad. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's kind of obvious now looking back on it. I wish we'd known more back then. You did, LB, but I wish more people had known more back then. It's interesting that in the summer of 2017, as all of this was going on,
shit on all that's holy. That's what I call it.
Yeah.
He went on the shit on all that's holy tour. He made sure he touched every holy site. Yeah. Ugh.
So Israel, has been developing the spy tech sector, this sort of private Mossad world where they have been privatizing all the things you would want the Mossad to be able to do. But now it's available for anybody for a few $1 million or whatever it might cost to hire a Black Cube or an NSO. And NSO is one of these interesting companies. NSO is the company that has allowed the iPhone basically to be hacked universally. That they've been able to create a hacking system that just spearfishes your phone and then can access your cameras, your pictures, whatever, without you really knowing that it's happening. It would have been incredibly surprising that Saudi Arabia would have been able to just go to NSO and buy this hacking software without Israeli approval. I mean, you'd imagine the IDF or whomever does this kind of approval in Israel would have said, sure, you can sell that to Saudi Arabia now, only once we've approved it. So the software was ultimately used to hack Jamal Khashoggi, which is Adnan Khashoggi's nephew. We'll get into that in a second. But to the writer Jamal Khashoggi, who was killed in Turkey, it's believed that the Pegasus software was used to hack his phone, and it was also believed to have hacked a whole bunch of other people's phones in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and also critics of MBS outside of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. This is a very really aggressive move by MBS. It's one thing, I guess, targeting people within your own country for this kind of intelligence, but targeting people around the world who are dissidents and opposed to your points of view in the aggressive way that they've done, because they've done this to at least 700 or more, it's believed, journalists, activists, you name it, around the world, where they've specifically targeted them to spy on them. This is, I don't know, it strikes me as being kind of unheard of in my experience covering the world. It must be unusual for the intelligence world too.
Let me speak to that. You've got Harvey Weinstein, who is not an ambassador, spy chief, whatever. He's a guy making movies, right? Mm-hmm. And he's hiring this group of, quote, ex-Israeli intelligence operatives on the ground who are harassing actresses. Mm-hmm. So let's get into what the diplomatic implications are for running intelligence on the soil of other countries. And this will speak to some of what Mike Flynn has done that is so incredibly inappropriate, even for the spy world. Mm-hmm. It is expected that other nations will spy on other nations. You're going to collect as much as you can, however you can. And you're going to have agents on the ground. Not only is that normal, we kind of want that, especially in a nuclear armed world. Let's say you enter a room and I cover your eyes suddenly. Are you going to sit there calmly, or are you going to swing your fists wildly? Because you can't see what's coming. So if you think of a country as that individual and your fists are actually nuclear weapons, now we want you to have some visibility into what we're doing so that we can communicate back and forth about what the real strategic situation is. So we've always tolerated a certain amount of espionage on soil, on domestic soil. We have other countries do. We want that. We just want our counterintelligence to be able to track the spies to know what they're looking at, because that will in turn give us information about what that host country where they're from, or who they're working from, because it's not always the same ethnicity or nationality that's working for a certain intelligence service. But we want to know what is it the Russians are interested in? What do the Israelis want? What are these guys doing? We know you're going to do something. Yeah, we do not want you completely dumb. It's like, they're going to attack us. We'll, send our subs out and nuke Washington. No. We want you to know a bit of what we're up to, especially if, like, hey guys, we're about to take the lead in a big way. You ought to negotiate a little nicer. We want the Chinese, we want the Russians, we want the Israelis, we want the French. our allies spy on each other all the time, and we don't think of that necessarily as a bad thing, no matter what Ed Snowden lied to everybody about. We want a bit of almost second opinion on our own situation. And so that's espionage. And in an unprecedented move, Director of National Intelligence James Clapper came out and said what nobody says in public. He says, look, everybody does espionage. Look, even the Chinese hacked our Office of Personnel Management database in its entirety and stole it. Well, that's just espionage, nice move, guys. And I was stunned. But what he said, well, first of all, he acknowledged publicly something that had made it public, which is Chinese intelligence had stolen our database of every U.S. government employee, especially the ones with clearances, so they could identify agents out in the field, which was resulted in a lot of bloodshed and chaos. But that was recognized in public and testimony. It was amazing.
What's really interesting to me is that these 5 basic
active
companies.
measures is another.
Yes. We'll get back to that in a second. So there's these 5 intelligence surveillance work around the world. And these 5 that have come up in the last few years, some of them are shut down by now, are all interconnected to Putin, Trump, and Netanyahu in a very, very direct way. And it's quite striking when you look at the Psy Group, which was basically the social media manipulation tool and company that helped Trump convince voters to really vote for Trump, but also helped swing the delegate count at the convention. They had a big operation called Project Rome in order to convince specific people inside the convention to vote a specific way for Trump. It was a very, very sophisticated operation against delegates at a party, a foreign country. It's kind of incredible that they were allowed to do this. The chief of staff of Bibi Netanyahu is on the board of directors of Psy Group, or at least was on the board of directors of Psy Group. The Black Cube company, which you mentioned just now, that's also ran an operation against Barack Obama's team. And guess who's on their board? 2 former Mossad directors. And Vincent Cengiz is a Russian oligarch who also was their first client at Black Cube. NSO Group, we just discussed that. We forgot to mention that Michael Flynn was a consultant for the NSO Group. That's the group that provided all this hacking software. You've got the Fifth Dimension. That used to be Benny Gantz's company. He's the, deputy prime minister of Israel now, whatever they're doing in their government there. And that used to be his company, and it runs very sophisticated AI. And then Carbon, which we've mentioned before, on narrative, which you've got ties to Jeffrey Epstein, ties to Eric Prince, and ties to Ehud Barak. I mean, this is not, and Victor Vexelberg, by the way, funded both of those companies. Boy, this is not just an accident. This is not something that just sort of happened out of thin air. This took a lot of planning, and they spent a lot of time trying to get here.
This is what that incredible chart that you've just put up here. This is what that means, and the viewers really need to get this, because this is not out there anywhere else. Mm-hmm. This is Israeli intelligence under Bibi Netanyahu attacked the United States, one of Israel's main patrons, if not its major patron. And we got to this at the end of the last episode that we did of Narrative, where we had the head of the Labor Party in Israel the night before 2016's election in the United States said, whoa, we are aggressive against this election as a country, and we may pay for it. This is not when I'm talking about espionage that's normal. Yes, you're going to listen as hard as you can, especially if you're Israel, because you're constantly in danger for all the reasons that any serious analyst knows. But this is different, and it's tied to Russian intelligence directly. And when you're talking about not just listening to, hey, we have an agent inside this political party who's telling us, oh no, their policy towards Ukraine is going to change. They may soften it some. That's espionage. That's the good stuff. That's what you hope your intelligence agency is coming up with to let you know what's going on in the world. That's cool. But when you say, oh no, we're going to compromise, push, run psyops against that political party and make them vote our way, convince them to vote our way, push them to take on our policy, and it's their democracy. You have transgressed the normal diplomatic implications of espionage, which of course Israel's going to have spies around. So is France. So is Spain. We got it. This is Israeli intelligence under Netanyahu full on attacked us the way the KGB would have blushed 30 years ago. And nobody is talking about it.
Now, why is no one talking about it? It blows my mind away that, we're 3 years into this. We've all been, investigating this in our own platforms for a very long time. It just seems like this, as you put on Twitter the other day, sort of this elephant in the room that no one is willing to address, but it's clearly there. It is that cutout that LB was talking about. You can see that Israel was involved in this, and yet no one is willing to even raise it publicly on any sort of mainstream forum. In fact, they go to great lengths to hide it.
I don't know about great lengths to hide it. Yes, that's going on, and could that also be part of the muscle, part of the influence, right? Don't talk about this. You can't expose us. You can't investigate us. You can't, write about it. Probably because that's frankly what everybody does to everybody else when they don't want to. You get your people in there in the side of journalism and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's also just this explosive terrain to try to venture into, that it's really hard for people who do want to pull at it to figure out how to tell the story. How do we tell this when there's been all this groundwork that was laid, and a lot of it intentionally and by people that would surprise you. Again, I brought this article up before, but I do think reading the Budapest Bridge and getting to know who Arthur Finkelstein was and how he was there at the founding of Breitbart, and that happened in Israel, I believe, and Netanyahu was there. That there is a counter narrative that was controlled to get it in there to where if you went anywhere near talking about how Israel operates as a state, specifically how Bibi Netanyahu's administration, what his goals were, what his aims were, to make it be this emotionally charged, toxic, painful place for journalists, for authors, for even investigators to go and know how to even tell the story without facing a backlash of being accused of being either anti-Semitic or conspiracy theorists, or all of this insanity that got woven in. So a big part of why I focus on organized crime, I focus on mobsters, I focus on the intersection of mobsters and spies, and history, and give the history to this, give the context to this, is that we can actually start telling the story of Israel and Russia and have that click for people, have that make sense for people, and have them understand it. We've always positioned Israel in terms of, okay, they're in the Middle East and it's the insanity of the Middle East, and yes, and there's the immediate threats are there, but also always remember that this was a brand new baby country born at a time that was where a huge Cold War between two big, massive world powers was forming and then raging. And you don't want to be the new little guy, vulnerable little guy, right? Caught between those two behemoths without having your foot in both of them.
No, you don't.
We don't know how this is going to shake out, but we certainly, everybody kind of just put yourself in the place of that small nation at that time and say, oh yeah, I would make Russia my friend. I would make them my big time friend. And there's a lot of people that are what I consider my people living there. I'd love for them to get out of there and to know that Israel's a safe place for them as well. Like, you're Israel, you're going to have that agenda. So if we look at the history between Israel and Russia, and how close they were for how long they were on the side of intelligence, on the side of sort of behind the scenes. Let's just make sure we don't get fucked, right? And then what started to happen? Well, some pretty big, wealthy, wretched mobsters.
I've enjoying this conversation so much. It took so long. It's been fantastic.
It's a big conversation.
When you guys come back on, please come back on, because I think we're going to finish this.
There are more episodes.
Yeah, there are definitely more episodes. It's Eric and LB, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I was going to leave everyone with one quote. I hope you'll give me permission to just quickly do that. This is another quote that came out of the Israeli media that sort of went unnoticed for a lot of people. This one from Ephraim Halevi, the former Mossad commander, who's also on the board of directors of Black Cube. So this guy sort of knew what was going on. He said, I'm not saying this in jest, the cyber attack targeting the American political system was a good example of a classic intelligence operation that successfully achieved its aim, which was to covertly manipulate and subvert their opponent's political system by rigging the elections to ensure the outcome was what the Russian leadership wanted. Of course, now we know that Israel was also probably, in all likelihood, involved in that entire thing.
Support Narrative's independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative, and check out our podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe and download.